Today's daf is daf ayin zayin. We'll begin on the bottom of daf ayin vav hamid beis with the words "My va'ani bosi bidvarecha," which is the first of the wide lines. That's 5 lines up before the end of the amud. That pasuk was quoted earlier in the daf from Sefer Daniel, and it implies that the Malach Gavriel addressed Daniel, and he says that b'schus, in the merit of your words, because if you recall what we saw yesterday was that Daniel was in a state of inui, a state of avelus, and he had declared that once he heard, he was notified that Koresh had withdrawn the permission that he gave to build a base on Mikdash. At that point, Daniel was in a state of avelus, lechem chamudas lo achalti, basar v'yayin lo ba LP, v'soch lo sachti, from which we derived that sicha is considered an inui, and perhaps even rechita is considered an inui. And now Gavriel Hamalach says, addressing Daniel, that ani basi bidbarecha, as a result of your declaration, your avelus, I was given permission to return to the pargo, me'achorei pargo. And the Gemara asks, when and why was this the case? When did Gavriel have to leave Achorei Pargo, and he was forced to vacate until at one point, b'schus, the dvarim of Daniel, he was allowed to return to the Pargo. Hainu d'chsiv, and this is all based on a prophecy of Yechezkel Hanovi, Perches, V'shivim ish miziknei Beis Yisrael, V'aznayu ben Shafan omed b'socham omdim lifnehem, V'ish miktarto biyado, Va'asar anan haktores olam. Now let's give a general interpretation of this pasuk, and then we'll get to the literal translation. Yechezkel sees in a prophetic vision that the Nichbedei Yisrael, the most important people in Yerushalayim, are standing in front of certain idols, tzuros, what we call, and different kinds of symbols of Avodah Zarah that Bnei Yisrael did, and they were maktir l'fneim the Ketores. And on these averos, there was a gzera that Gavriel would have to leave the Achorei Pargo. The Gemara is going to explain why. Now we have the literal translation of this pasuk, which is as follows. And 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel, with Yaznayu, the son of Shaphan, standing amongst them, was standing before these idols, each man with his censer in his hand, with a thick cloud of incense rising. And it says further, Vayishlach tavnis yad vayikacheu b'tzitzis roshi, vayikacheni b'tzitzis roshi, and he stretched forth the form of a hand and took me by a lock of my hair. Vatiso si ruach bein ha'aretz ubein hashamayim v'taveo si Yerushalmiya b'maros elokim, and a wind carried me between the earth and the heavens and brought me to Jerusalem in a divine vision. El Pesach Shar Apnimis Hapone Tzafona, to the entrance of the inner gate of the holy temple that faces northward. There, and here we turn to today's daf, Ayin Zayin, Shasham Moshav Semel Hakina Hamakne. And there was a seat of the provocative image of provocation. So Yechezkel sees in this great vision of Nevuah a dmus of Mara H, of a kind of a fiery being, and it sends its hand out and it carries Yechezkel by his hair through the airspace between Bavel until Yerushalayim to the Pesach Shara Zora, which is pointed in the direction of north. And at that moment, at that point and location, he sees a Semel Akino Hamakna, which is some sort of an idol that causes kina, meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's anger is incurred by this idol. Yechezkel goes on, he says, Vayaveo si el chatzar beis Hashem aprimis. Further, I was taken pnima into, so that Tmus again continues to carry Yechezkel and brings him into the Ezra's Kohanim. V'hinei Pesach heichal Hashem bein ha'ulam bein ha'mizbeach ke'esrim v'chamisha ish. And in that area, he sees mimul Pesach heichal, in the area between the ulam and the mizbeach, he sees 25 men, upneim kedma, and they are facing the east, meaning the outer exit from the heichal, and mishtachvim kedma l'shemesh, and they are prostrating themselves towards the sun in the east. And the Gemara darshans mimashma shenemar upneim kedma, if their faces are facing towards the east, why does he add that their backs are towards the Heichal, towards the west of the Azara? If they were in the Azara facing east, then their backs were facing west, towards the Heichal, the Kodesh Kadoshim in the west. Elamat Talmud Lomar, what does it mean? Achoreim el Heichal Hashem, melamid shayu porim atzman. They expose their bottoms on the back, the derech bizayon, vayumas reason they defecated klapi mata towards the kivu, the direction of the heichal. Mevazim is kvod Hashem. This is a terrible bizayon to kvod Hashem. The Gemara says that after all these terrible actions, Omalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMichael. Now, Michael is the angel that's dedicated to speak on the defense of Klal Yisrael. Michael Sarcha Umascha, your nation that you represent in tefillah and prayer. Again, we don't have as Ramban points out, we don't have an intermediary angel between God and us, but we do have an angel that presents a defense in front of the Kisei HaKavod, and that's Michael. And now Hashem notifies Michael that the people have sinned, they've wronged. Amal Lefana, Michael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rebbeinu Shalom, Dayo Latovim Shebahem, you should be able to waive and grant Mechila in the schus of the Tovim Shem, the tzaddikim amongst them. Amar lo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to Michael, Ani soref osam. I'm going to burn up the Rishoyim, v'lat Tovim shebahem, and even those who are righteous amongst them, they should have made a mechad, they should have made a protest, and they didn't do so. And as a result of their passivity here, accepting the situation as it were without protesting, they deserve to be destroyed together with the Rishoyim. It's interesting that the word here of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Sorev, is Midah Keneged Midah, because in the vision of Yechezkel, they were Maktir Ketores in front of Avodah Zarah. And Ketores has a reach tov and also reach ras. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he's going to burn not only the Rishonim, but also the good ones amongst them. As we said before, they should have made a mechad. They didn't. Miyad, immediately God implements his decree and he punishes them. As the pasuk says, Vayomer el ha'ish levusha badim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns now to the Malach Gavriel, who is the Sar over the Eish, over the fire. And that's the Gemara Psachim Daf Kuf Yud Ches, with regard to the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were thrown into the furnace. By Yomer, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu addresses Gavriel, Bo el Benos Lagalgal el Tachas Lakruv. I want you to go to a place amongst the Ophanim of the higher angels that's located under the Kruv. Now there are Arba Chayos in the Merkava Shel Mala, and their faces are Bitsuras Kruv. That's the beginning of Sefer Yechezkel. Malei Chafanecha Gachle Eish. Fill up your hands with hot coals. Bibenos Lakruvim Uzrok ala Ir. So Yechezkel is seeing within his Mar Nevuah, this is all part of Yechezkel, that Gavriel also klape kefishin itztava. He went amongst these Ophanim and he dug his hands into the coals, miben akruvim. As we said before, the kruvim are the 4 chayos of the Merkava at the beginning of Sefer Yechezkel. And miyad, afterwards it says, Vayishlach hakruves yado mibenos lakruvim ela eish asher benos hakruvim vayisa vayiten es chofnei levush habadim vayikach vayetze. As Gavriel changed, and he did not fulfill the request, the demand of God, exactly as God has demanded. God said to him, he should take in his hands, Gavriel, the gecholim, the coals, miben hakruvim. He didn't do that himself. But he said to one of the kruvim, sheyavi lo. The kruv was the one who took these gecholim and brought them into the hands of Gavriel. And Gavriel was hoping this would be a delay tactic, that until the gecholim would reach him and they would arrive in his hands, they'd be delivered into his hands, they would cool off. And that would sort of reduce the decree of God. And this was, now, again, this Haggadah and the whole parsha in Yechezkel defies, simple understanding, because we don't know that the Malachim have freedom of choice and they can deviate from the will of God. But in any event, this is what we see here, that Vayomer leish lavura badim, come between the galgal beneath the kruv, and we said that these are types of angels that appear in the Merkava vision at the beginning of Yechezkel, and he wanted him to throw fire coals upon the city of Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim was responsible for the destruction of the Mikdash. However, as we see, Vayisa Vayiten el Chofnei Levush Habad, and the coals were placed into the cup hands of one of the cloth in linen, Vayikach Vayetze. And he took the fire coals and he went out to throw upon the city of Yerushalayim. Now, all this is meant to answer the question that we started with today, and that is, why was Gavriel expelled from the Pargod? Omer Rav Chana bar Bizna, Omer Rav Shimon b'Chasida, Ilmoli lo nitztavu gecholim, nitztanenu gecholim b'yod shel kruv, liyod shel Gavriel, lo nishtayru misonem shel Yisrael, sorid upolit. If not for the fact that the hot coals, had cooled down when they were being transmitted from the hands of the Kruv to the hands of Gavriel, the entire nation of Israel would have been totally destroyed by these burning hot coals. And not a single Jew would have survived. And of course, the Sonei Yisrael is a euphemism for Klal Yisrael. The Gemara is explaining that although Gavriel was commanded to take the coals from between the Kruvim, he had the Kruv take the coals, which were then placed in Gavriel's hands. This interim step provided time for the coals to cool off somewhat, and that saved the Jewish people from total destruction. Uksiv, and furthermore, it's written there in the Mara Yechezkel, Behinei ish levush abadim asher hakoses b'masna. Behold, the man clothed in linen with the slate upon his loins. Meshiv dover liomro. He brought back an answer saying, Asisi kasher tzivisani. I have done everything that you commanded me. Now, Gavriel's answer is that he accomplished his mission, which is a bit strange because he didn't do it the way that God wanted him to do it. Rabbi Yochanan, the Osa Shaz, a punishment for Gavriel, Hotziu leGavriel me'achorei ha'paragod. Number one, they expelled him from the Paragod, which is where the Shekhinah is. Number two, Umachyua, and they lashed him, Shitin Pulse Denura, 60 lashes with a rod of fire. Again, that a Malach Gavriel is now being punished. It's a mind-boggling concept. Amrule, they said to him, Lo avadet, lo avadet. If you would have done nothing at all, maybe you could have somehow justified that, you know what, you're deflecting or delaying the infliction of the punishment in the hope that Hashem's anger would subside and the decree would be rescinded. Fine. Iavadet, but you went ahead and you went to fulfill God's mandate. Is Amailo Avadet Kida Hakducha? Why didn't you fulfill it exactly the way you commanded? Why didn't you take the coals yourself, the hot coals, as God had commanded you? Instead, you told the Kruv to pass them to you so that they would cool off in his hands. The Ode, and furthermore, the Avadet, now that you did what you did, Leslach Ein Meshivin ala Kalkola. And this is to be read in a question mark form, a rhetorical question. Do you not subscribe to the principle that one should not report back with bad news? Since you came back and you told the heavenly celestial spheres that you had done what you were commanded to do, and the city of Jerusalem would be destroyed. Okay, this is Roman numeral number 1 in this very, very complicated Agadita. You know, sometimes you understand the Agadita, and sometimes you just have to try to understand it on even a superficial level. Now, in Roman numeral number 2 of this Agadita, we want to get back to the question that we asked: how did Gavriel get reinstated into the Pargod as a result of Daniel? So Aisu ledubiel Sara de Parsoi. After Gavriel was ejected from the Achorei Pargod, they brought a different Malach whose name is Dubiel, and he is the Sar, the angel over Paras, up in the heavens. And the name Dubiel, if I could find the note here. Oh, the Gemara of Avodah Zarah says that the Parsim Ochlim v'shosim kidov u'misarbelin basar kidov u'megalin seir kidov ve'elem menucha kidov. In any event, the name Dov here is very appropriate for Paras, because Paras really, their whole behavior and their morality can be expressed or explained in a mirror image of a dove. All the dimensions and attributes of a dove applied to Parsian, and the sar of this nation up in Shemayim, because he has all these midos and these attributes of a dove, therefore he's called Dubiel. So that's not a name you'd want to give someone, Dubiel. In any event, they bring the Malach Dubiel, the Sar of the representative in Shemayim of Paras, the Okme Becharike. They put him in the place of Gavriel. Could you imagine? Gavriel up in the heavens is now being replaced because he was expelled by none other than the Malach, the Sar of Dubiel of Paras. The Shimesh Esrim Ve'echad Yom. Now these 21 days begin today, which Shivasar B'Tammuz. And these are the 3 weeks which we call Ein HaMitzarim. And Yirmiyah Navi, at the beginning of Yirmiyah, says, Makel Shaked Ani Ro'eh. And Shaked, which is an almond tree, grows during a period of 21 days. And Paras is now reigning up, reigning supreme up in the Achorei HaPargod for 21 days. Hainu Dechsiv, Hosgin Daniel. Gavriel now turns to Daniel and he says, V'sar Malchus Paras Omed L'Negdi Esrim Ve'echad Yom. The Sar of Paras will stand in my place now for 21 days until I will get cavalry, I will get help from Hine Michael, from the Malach Michael who's going to come to help me. Hine Michael Achad Hasarim Arishonim Bolo Azreni Vanino Sarti Sham Eitzel Malche Paras. Again, one part of this we understand. The Sar of Paras, by the name of Dubiel, was set in place to replace Gavriel for 21 days until the Malach Michael came to help. Now, after Dubiel serves as the higher angel for 21 days, Yahavale, they gave him gifts. In other words, he was bestowed, his reward was bestowed upon him for the 21 days that he served Me'achorei HaPargod. Esrim v'chad malche. 21 different kings would be subjugated by Paras, by the kingship of Paras, as a reward for the 21 days that the Dubiel, the Sar of Paras, served up in Shemayim Me'achorei HaPargod. It reminds me in baseball, that sometimes or in any sport, the key player gets weak and they replace him taking another pitcher out of the bullpen. So now we have to reward Dubiel because Dubiel was now filling in for Gavriel. We needed a malach over there, Me'achorei HaPargod. Uparvasa Dimashig. He writes here, B'nosaf l'kach nosnu lo. They gave him another gift as a reward to this Dubiel. Namal, a seaport, B'yam, Hanikra Namal HaMelucha. And from that Namal HaMelucha, they actually extract pearls from the bottom of the water. And now Dubiel sees, he becomes aware of the fact that he's in good tidings, he's good standing. It's a good time for him to put forth a request because he's being showered with gifts and recognized by the Almighty. Omar. So he says in front of all the celestial agents, what we call the Pamalio Shalmala, Sivuli Yisrael bi'akarga. Karga is a tax. And if, let's say, you have a government and you have a people in exile, the government will force the people who really are not part of his nation, they will force him to pay a very severe tax. So, Ksivuli Yisrael, write for me, which is like almost the signature of the heavenly court, as far as Israel is concerned, be a cargo, that I will be able to subjugate the people of Israel and collect a tax from them. It's called mas gulgolis, meaning per head, per capita, a tax. Kosvule. And the Pamalia Shalmala agreed. They responded positively to his petition, and they wrote him exactly what he asked to be written. Then Dubiel asked for something more than that. Sivuli Rabbanan Bakarga. Make sure that you write in this document that I will be able to collect taxes even from Rabbanan the Talmidei Chacham, the Kosvule. And they responded in the positive, and the Pamalia Shalmala wrote exactly as he had requested. The Idnu de Boile Michtam, but now, after they wrote the document, they were ready to sign the document. They needed that signature to validate the document. Again, he's not allowed to enter into the paragod, but he's achorei paragod, he's beyond the paragod, the Omar, and he asked the question, does this nation of Paras, the Persians and other nations, are they on such a level that they deserve to control and have dominion over Yisrael? And now you're talking about the Chachmei Yisrael, over the Talmidei Chachamim, to force the Talmidei Chachamim, who are not rich people, to fork over the taxes. And in order to dramatize this, a pasuk now from Tehillim is quoted, and we're going to learn a Kal Vachomer from the women, the wives of Talmidei Chacham, to the Talmidei Chacham themselves, because the wives they allow their husbands to learn Torah, to vox Talmidei Chachamim, and the pasuk says, "Shav lachem mashkimei kum me'acharei sheves ochle lechem atzavim ken yitein lidido shena," which means that the Torah, the Tanakh here, is addressing the Baalei Umnis, those who go out and they are craftsmen, they work, and it's saying, you know what, you're wasting your time by working and eating, the bread that you in sadness, so to speak, and you give with such tremendous work, you get the lechem, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you parnasa if you will. The pasuk says, if you will deny yourself sleep, minaded shena lechvoda. So what does it mean? Kain yitain liyadido shena. Rabbi Yitzchak Elu, this is a reference to the Shoseim Shel Talmidei Chachamim, sheminadados shena b'olam hazeh. And Rashi explains that they stay up very late at night, waiting for their husbands to return from the Beis Medrash. So they reduce the amount of sleep, they forfeit sleep for the sake of their husbands, who are each one for a Talmid Chacham. And Zochos Yolam Haba, and through this great act of sacrifice for the sake of the learning of their husbands, they merit the world to come. And how much more so the Talmidei Chacham themselves, which is called Ayin Lo Rasa. We can't even imagine in the wildest dreams in our eyes what the schar, what will be the reward for these Talmidei Chachamim will be. And therefore, Gavriel asks, how is it possible that these Talmidei Chachamim will be subjugated by the Sar of the kingship of Paras, and he's going to collect taxes from them. But lo hishgichu, Olaf. Unfortunately, the Pamalia Shomal didn't pay any attention to this Sanigoria, this protection and defense of Gavriel for Talmidei Chachamim. So Omar Lefonov, now Gavriel says, forget about the Pamalia Shomal. I'm going to address the Ribono Shalom directly. Im you kol chachmei umas ha'olam b'kaf maznaim Daniel ich chamudus b'kaf shniya lo nimta machrias kulam. If you were to take all the nations of the world and all their great scholars and put them on one side of a scale and put Daniel, who is a pure person, each chamudos, on the other side of the scale, it would be impossible for all the chachmei umas ha'olam to be machriya, to tip the scale in their favor with all due respect to their chachma. That's how great Daniel is. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, miu zeh, which malach now is being melamed zchus al banai, who is telling us that the Talmidei Chachamim should be protected and spared from the gzeira of the malchus of Paras, Amru Lefanov, Ribono Shalom Gavriel. This is none other than Gavriel. He's being melamed zchus. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't see him because he was outside the pargod, so to speak. Amar Lehem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to the Pamalia Shomal Yovo. Let him go back into Tocha Pargod. And Nemar, as the Pasuk says, which these are words that came out of the mouth of Malach Gavriel to Daniel, Vani Basi Kid Bidvarecha. That was the Pasuk that we started with today, that we wanted to interpret. It means that in this chus, in this merit, that I, meaning Gavriel, mentioned you, Daniel, right? And I said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can put Daniel on one side of the scale and allow outweigh all the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam. Is in that schus that I spoke in your shvach, I was zocher to enter and be replaced as I was always inside the pargod. Omar lahu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu addresses the Pamalia Shalmala, and he says, Leu, let Gavriel in mitoch hapargud. Ailu. That's exactly what they did. And they brought Gavriel back to his place. He was reinstated in the Achorei, in the pargud itself. Also, Ashkechei L'Dubil. When Gavriel comes in, Tocha Pargod, of course, the first malach he encounters, is none other than Dubil, the Noketle La Igarta Biyode. And Dubil is holding on to this document, which was given and signed by the Pamalia Shalmala. And in that document, it says that both Klal Yisrael and the Chachamim would be given over to the Malchus, the kingship, and the government of Paras, and they would have to pay the taxes, even the Chachamim. So Gavriel wanted to take away this document and just completely erase it. Now it says Ubala. Now, I think the word Ubala means that Dubil swallowed the document. Let me just see. I don't want to get this wrong. Dubil quickly swallowed it. See what he says in the footnote. The act of swallowing, if it intimates a certain metaphysical reality. Okay, so again, this is the secret language of the Agadata. That's my Rebbe of Soloveitchik used to say, that the Agadata is written in a secret language. We don't know the language of Agadata. Ika Diamri, there's a second tradition, Michtav Havik Siva. Perhaps the Pamali Shalmala signed this document, but Michtam Lo Avi Chasma. They never got around to signing it. They wrote it, the text, but they didn't sign it. And the reason why they didn't sign it is because Gavriel was reinstated to his original place, B'toch HaPargo. Ika Diamri, a third transmission. Af Michtam Nami Avi Chasma. It's true, as we originally assumed, that there was a chasima, and the Pamaya Shomal had signed the document. So that even before Gavriel got reinstated, Me'achorei HaPargo, they had a chance, a small window of time to sign this document. Hidebale, Machak Lemine. So that in the first transmission, it seems that Gavriel could not defeat the Sar Dubiel. Dubiel was able to swallow it. But in the second one, or actually the third in order, is Machak Lemine. As a result of swallowing the document, Machak Lemine, he erased the signatures on the document, which means that the document is no longer binding. Again, this is all in metaphysical terms. The Ben Yoda says, "Eina dvarma lolu kipashtutam, lefi she'ein sham l'mayla lo ksiva v'lo chasima lo blia v'lo mechika el hakol derech moshelhu." The ikar ha'inyan shekol shlita sheyesh l'sari umos ha'olam yisodo minitzos shel kedusha sheyesh lehem shlita olam ksiva chasima hakavana lechizuk ha'chiza benitzos zeh. So these are all symbolic, metaphoric terms. Vahainu. Now the Gemara is adding something to the last of the three transmissions, and that is the Malchusa de Paras Ika de Yov Karga, Ika de Lo Yov Karga. That when the kingship of Paras subjugated the Jewish people, and the people of Israel had to pay the taxes, there were those who didn't pay the taxes. And those who did pay the taxes, they did so because the Geras, the document, was signed. Those who didn't pay the taxes is because at the end, the document was erased. The chasima, I mean, the signature was obliterated. Now, Gavriel says to Daniel, "Vani yotze v'nei sar yavanba." Now it's time for a different kingship to control the Jewish people, and that's Yavan. And it seems that when Yavan is given the reins, then Gavriel has to again vacate the Achorei HaPargo, and the Sar of Yavan will now take his place. The Ave, Gavriel starts yelling and screaming so that Malchus Yavan should not be able to control and subjugate the Jewish people. But once again, Leko the Ashkach Bey, nobody paid any attention to him. And even though with regard to Malchus Paras, Gavriel to some extent was able to be Mavatel the Gzera, and the Talmidei Chacham would not have to pay the taxes, but nevertheless, with regard to Malchus Yavan, he did not succeed at all. Now, there's another interpretation here, which is not Rashi, and is presented by Rabbeinu Eliakim and the Marsha, that it's not the sar of Yavan, but rather kavoni l'sar shel Paras. She'omelo Gavriel shebisha sheyotzasi lachzor l'gdulasi vayasar Paras tzoik v'tzovach al Yisrael sheyotzu mishlistuso v'lo eshgiach v'dvoro. A whole different interpretation here of the Mash. Now the Gemara back on Daf Ayin Vav was trying to figure out whether or not Rechitza is antithetical to Inui, meaning if a person will abstain from washing his body, he brings himself into a state of Inui. And the Gemara established that from the fact that the pasuk says V'sach lo sachti, there's an extra two words here in the pasuk to teach me that even Rechitza, not only Sicha, is considered an Inui. That was the Gemara in Daf Ayin Vav. The Ibais Ema, Rechitza de Ikre Inui Minol, and I have a different source from which I derive that Rechitza washing is considered an Inui, Mehacha, from the following pasuk. This is in Malachim Aleph, Perik Beis, Tichsiv, with regard to Shlomo Melech, who put Adoniyo, his own brother, to death because Adoniyo tried to rebel against the king and appoint himself as a king. But now we're going to focus not on Adoniyo, but rather on Avisar HaKohen, Evyasar HaKohen. Because Evyasar HaKohen had in fact joined Adoniyo in the rebellion against Shlomo Melech. And Shlomo Melech, as we said, had Adoniyo, the rebellious brother, he had him killed. What about Avyasar, who supported Adoniyo in his rebellion? The pasuk says, Avyasar HaKohen Omar HaMelech Anosos, in a place called Anosos, Lech al Sodecha, go back to your fields. Ki ish maves, really you deserve to be executed. I will not kill you today. Why? Two reasons. In other words, this Evyasar HaKohen has two zechuyos in the eyes of Shlomo Melech that spare him death. Ki nasasas Aaron Hashem Elokim l'fnei David avi. First of all, you were the one when David was running as a fugitive from his son Avshalom. You carried the Aron as an indication that you identified with David. And not only that, but v'chiyas anisa b'chol asher hisana avi. You deliberately brought upon yourself all the physical afflictions as an act of empathy, as an act of empathy with David, that David was running away from Avshalom and he was suffering anguish, as we'll soon see exactly whether he was going barefoot and so forth and so on. Anyway, you yourself, Avyasar, in order to identify with David's suffering during this period of time when he was running as a fugitive from Avshalom, you also provid aninus, meaning his honor, inu. David, when David is running away from Avshalom, and he gets to a place called Machanayim, and there 3 men approach David, and they bring him like a bed to sleep in. They bring him food, they bring him drink. And the pasuk says, Udvash v'chem'a v'tzon ushfos bakar higishu leDavid la'am asher ito lechol ki amru ha'am ra'ev v'ayev v'tzamei bamidbar. So they mentioned 3 afflictions that David and his people were suffering from. And that's Ra'av, Ayef, Vitzameh. Ra'ev, Ayef, Itzameh. Now, what are these three inuyim? Well, Ra'ev is clear. It means there was no food to eat while he was running away. Tameh means clearly he didn't have ample supply of water to drink. And then we get to Ayef. So we'll see that the Gemara is going to identify Ayef as the inability to wash yourself. Now, with regard to all these sufferings, the afflictions of David and now of Yasar also takes it upon himself to be afflicted as a matter of commensurate. Shlomo declares, "V'chias anesa b'chol asher es ana avi." That the indication here is that there were three inuyim about which Shlomo Melch says, "Ev Yasar, you took upon yourself these inuyim. I will therefore spare you and stave off the punishment of death." Ra'ev milechem. So David is hungry from bread. He doesn't have bread to eat. V'tzameh, and he's thirsty. She mimayim shalosh asu mayim. So what's Ayev? That's the category that we're not sure about. Mimai, why were they so exhausted? Lav, should we not interpret it? Mirachitza. If you don't wash yourself, you get exhausted. And that's another affliction, the feelings of exhaustion. So we see from this parsha that rechitza is one of the inuyim, meaning if you don't wash yourself, you're in a state of inui. So the Gemara rejects it. The dilma minila sasando. Maybe it means Ayef literally was barefoot and he couldn't wear shoes. Has nothing to do with the fact that he couldn't wash his body. Ella Amar Rabbi Yitzchak me'hacha. We're going to have to interpret the word Ayef as the absence of rechitza based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Mayim Karim al Nefesh Ayefa. Now notice that the Mayim is coming al Nefesh. In other words, it's external. It's not water that he's drinking internally, but water that's on his body. And that's rechitza. And if he does not do this rechitza, then nafsho ayefa. And now we're going to learn, we derive the conclusion that ayef, in the context of David and his chaperones, his people, means ayef mirechitza, not from Nilas Hasan. The Gemara again wants to reject it. The Dilma, that which it says, Mayim Karim al Nefesh Ayefa, is Mishasiyah. How do you know that Mayim Karim al Nefesh Ayefa is referring to Rechitza? Maybe it's referring to Shasiyah. He needs the cold water to drink in order to be Meshiv Nefesh, because he's Ayefa. So Gemara rejects that and says, Miksiv bin Nefesh Ayefa, that the water went into the Nefesh. But rather it says Al Nefesh, meaning external to the body of the person. And that indicates Rechitza. Now, the fourth thing that we learned from the language of Inui in Yom Kippurim, there were 5 languages of Inui, was Ne'ilas Asandal. The Gemara wants to know now, Ne'ilas Asandal Minolan, how do we know that taking off your shoes is Inui? Dichsiv, again going back to the same parsha of David HaMelech, running away from Avshalom in Shmuel Beis, Perek Tezvav, it says, V'David oleh b'ma'alei hazeisim oleh ubocha. V'roshlo chafui v'holech yochef. We could read the whole translation of the pasuk. It says, and David was going up the ascent of the mountain of Olives, crying as he ascended, with his head covered and going bare. Yachef. So what does it mean he went bare? So this pasuk describes the beginning of David's fugitive flight from Yerushalayim, from Avshalom's encroaching army. The verse characterizes the hardships that David endured during his flight, and these are characterized as inuyim, as afflictions. And his going bare, yachef, lav, mimai, what was he bare of? Lav miminias asandal, from wearing shoes. So we see that wearing shoes is called inui. The dilma misusya umartika. Maybe David was bare of a horse and a whip. In other words, a king would certainly travel by horse, not by foot. Maybe he was wearing shoes, but he didn't have a horse. Ella Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. In other words, I think the Gemara is saying you're right. I don't know for sure that Yachef in the pasuk itself. I need some other proof that Yachef means, in the context of David, that he went barefoot. Mechacha. Okay, from a pasuk in Yeshayahu Navi. Okay, so now we're up to this pasuk in Yeshayahu Navi. Lech upitachta hasak me'al masnecha v'nalcha tachlots me'al raglecha. Go release your sackcloth from your loins and remove your shoe from your foot. In this pasuk, Yeshayahu is commanded to remove his clothing and his shoes to demonstrate. Again, we'll see in a minute that to remove his clothing doesn't mean that he's going to be naked. To demonstrate how the captives of Mitzrayim and Cush will be led naked and barefoot by their Assyrian captors. This is all based on the Radak and the Mitsudos. This has to do with the historical moment of Golus Asoras Hashvatim. So the Gemara says, "My love, mini'ilas hasandal." When the Jews will go out to exile, they'll have to go barefoot. It has nothing to do with, with riding on horses. I mean, we're talking about Yeshayahu Navi. Yeshayahu Navi doesn't ride horses. We derive from this that Yachef, even in the case of David HaMelech, means that he was barefoot without his shoes. Gemara rejects this as well. V'ema perhaps b'min olim hametulayim. It meant that Yeshayahu Navi, to demonstrate what's going to happen in Golus, he would have to go out in ripped shoes. But he didn't have to go out barefoot. So that would mean, I think, if I understand the Gemara correctly, that in terms of Yom Kippurim, we can only derive the conclusion that on Yom Kippur we have to wear min olim mitulayim, ripped shoes. Let's see if by chance he adds anything here. Patched shoes, he calls it. Ilo temachi aram mamish. It can't be that aram means he was naked. Elab gadim bluyim. It means that Yeshaya would have to wear tattered clothing. He would have to wear patched shoes, and that's what Yachef means. Not that he's bare without shoes on, as we call it barvis in Yiddish, right, barefoot, but rather he would wear patched shoes. And all this is, again, the demonstration of Yeshayahu about what's going to happen with the Shvuyim at the time of Mitzrayim and Cush, when the Aseres Hashvatim would go into Golus under Sancheriv. Elomer of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, I have to quote another pasuk now to prove that the word Yachev means that he would not wear his shoes. Mehacha, from a pasuk in Yirmiyah, a nevuah of Yirmiyah, when Yirmiyah castigates the people and tells them they better do tshuva, otherwise they're going to go out into Golus, and he warns them, Mini raglech miachef ugronech mitzimah. He's telling Knesset Yisrael, Mini atzmech min achet, desist from sin. Kidei shelo yavo raglech lidei achuf. You'll have to go out to Golus if you don't desist from sin, and you'll end up going barefoot. Umini l'shonech midvarim betelim, and don't speak frivolous and meaningless words and waste your koach hadibur, the kadosh, the kedusha of dibur. Kidei shelo yavo gronech lidei tzima, because if you're going to have to go out to Golus, your throats will be parched. You will not have access to water. And we're going to derive from this that the word yachev means to go without shoes. You'll tell me maybe it means to go with packed shoes or ripped shoes. No, it cannot mean that. Why? Because when you go out to Golus, then unfortunately, tragically, you go without any shoes at all. Not even with packed shoes. So now we can interpret the word yachev in David HaMelech that he went out barefoot without any shoes. And since it's called Inui, we derive from this that Nilas Sandal is Inui. And now the Gemara goes on to say, Tashmish Amita Dikri Inui Minol, in the fifth and last of the 5 categories. How do we know that on Yom Kippur you have to abstain from intimate relations? And that's called Inui. The Siv, and we go back now to the parsha of Lavan. And Lavan imposes an oath on Yaakov regarding his 2 daughters, the wives of Yaakov, Rachel and Leah, im ta'anes benosai vim tikach noshim al benosai, that you should not afflict my daughters, nor should you marry other wives in addition to the 2 that you already married, Rachel and Leah. And the Gemara now on the top of Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis says, im ta'ana. What was the first part of this pasuk referring to? Ta'anes benosai mi tashmish, which means that you'll deny tashmish. You won't fulfill your conjugal responsibilities as a husband. They will suffer inui. V'im tikach mitzaros, and if you'll marry other women, that'll be tsaros. And all this was part of the shvuah that Lavan imposed upon Yaakov, that he should not marry other wives, which will become tsaros. Now, once we see that he warned him, that Lavan warned Yaakov, minias tashmish, denying tashmish, and he called it Beloshan Inui and Panes Benosa. We're going to derive from this that without tashmish, you're in a state of Inui, and therefore Inui and the mitzvah of Yom Kippur requires abstaining from tashmish amita.